We got a hold of the faculty handbook of Holy Cross
Yeah.
Academy, and let's just read some passages.
So, religious affiliation. Holy Cross Academy was founded as a private, independent, preparatory school in the Catholic monastic tradition of education by the Monastery of the Exaltation of the Most Holy Cross, with the permission of the Most Reverend Michael J. Duddick of Passaic, New Jersey. Parentheses, in whose diocese of the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church the Academy is located. So they're like really stressing the fact that they're strictly Catholic and that they are under the Eparchy of Passaic. That's what this is saying. You want to go on to the next passage?
Legal jurisdiction regarding Holy Cross Academy. Holy Cross Academy is an independent, non-for-profit corporation in the state of Florida. It is neither owned nor operated by the Catholic Archdiocese of Miami or the Byzantine Rite Catholic Diocese of Passaic, New Jersey. Therefore, it is inappropriate and in fact useless to contact the bishops of either diocese or the superintendent of schools of the Archdiocese of Miami regarding matters of Holy Cross Academy, since the school is neither owned, governed, nor controlled by either of these dioceses. Likewise, its priests are not members of either diocese, parentheses, they are priests of Holy Cross Monastery. Therefore, for matters relating to the administration, operation, policies, decisions, etc. of Holy Cross Academy, there is no higher authority to whom to direct a suggestion, concern, complaint, or appeal than the Chancellor Headmaster, who is the president and highest authority regarding this corporation.
Okay. You know how in the first paragraph it goes, Holy Cross Academy was founded with the permission of the Most Reverend Michael Duddick of Passaic, New Jersey. So it was with the permission of Passaic, New Jersey.
And they don't have any power over it.
Got it.
That's what they're saying.
Got it.
Which is very confusing.
I would love to have a conversation with Father Abbott one day and ask him this. I'm Paula Barros.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
And this is Sacred Scandal.
I remembered that something was communicated to the Vatican, but, I really don't know too much about how that whole system operates.
So there was always that weirdness of you have this Byzantine Catholic on one side and you have this Roman Catholic on the other.
So how are they able to actually continue if they were told to cease and desist, essentially, but they didn't?
Well, the dude was a fraud. They weren't priests. They were predators, man.
I could totally believe that there were people that are out there to, get them because they have something so good that's going on and all these wonderful people surrounding them. I wouldn't doubt if there was somebody out there to be like, let's shut the church down.
He shall cease and desist from presenting himself as a professed monk and is, wow. How in the world did they get to open that school then with all this going on?
As the investigation into sexual abuse at Holy Cross Academy continued, the legal teams for the defense and prosecution continued to get little cooperation from the school's leaders.
Father Abbot Gregory Wendt and Father Damien Gibault, the priests of Holy Cross Academy, remained silent on the advice of their attorneys. So the legal teams for the defense and the prosecution started looking more deeply into their history and the schools on their own.
And as they started asking questions, both sides found that they weren't the only ones looking into Holy Cross and the two priests. Years before the murder of Sister Michelle, the Eparchy of Passaic, New Jersey started its own investigation into the school and the monastery. The Eparchy, which is like the diocese in the Roman Catholic faith, was trying to find out if Holy Cross was actually a part of the Byzantine Catholic Church or any church at all.
Holy Cross was within the territory of this New Jersey eparchy, and as they explored the history of the school, they started to realize that the priests and the monks may have been using the church's name to misrepresent what they really were.
The issues appeared to stretch back to the original formation of the school back in 1985. By then, Father Wendt and Father Damien had been operating their two-man monastery for almost 3 years. According to documents that we've come across from the eparchy, the priests met with the Catholic Archdiocese of Miami and Bishop Michael Dudek from the Byzantine Church in New Jersey. They laid out plans for a K-12 academy. At the end of those talks, the bishop said no to the high school, but did eventually agree to them opening a middle school.
By 1996, Bishop Dudek retired, and the new bishop, Andrew Pataki, recently took over. At some point, he took notice of Holy Cross Academy, and Bishop Pataki summoned Fathers Wendt and Damien to a meeting.
I am Peter Davidson, author of Murder at Holy Cross. Well, the rationale that I read in all the communication that they had, there was a whole a hearing. They pretty much had a tribunal, they called it, where they confronted Wendt and Damien about what they were up to. And the reason was that, according to the bishop, the eparchy had tried to do high school level, but it never worked out. They were successful doing elementary school, successful doing middle school, but high schools, it just didn't work. And he wouldn't give him his permission. But the eparchy guaranteed a $1.4 million loan to the bank that enabled Wendt to build the Holy Cross campus. And then Wendt and Damien went one step further. They defied the bishop by doing a high school.
This meeting took place in June of 1996. And what Bishop Pataki claimed was that Fathers Wendt and Damien secured the loan to build a new school and expand to a high school without anyone in New Jersey or the Miami Diocese knowing until it was already done.
One of the documents we came across talked about how the Archbishop of Miami and the Byzantine bishop from Passaic were invited to bless the new school building when it finally opened. It was only when they got there on the day of the ceremony that they realized they were blessing a high school they said wasn't allowed to exist.
But it was too late. The school was already open, and they did the blessing anyway, not to cause a scene.
It's not clear from any eparchy documents we've come across what the plan was for Holy Cross after this first meeting, and we've not been able to get any response from the eparchy. But what is clear from public records is that not long after this meeting, Fathers Wendt and Damien started making some changes to all of Holy Cross. First, it's important to know that since they were both founded, Holy Cross the school and Holy Cross the monastery were separate legal entities. The property of the school was owned by Holy Cross Academy Incorporated, and the properties that were a part of the monastery were held by Monastery of the Exaltation of the Most Holy Cross Incorporated. Documents show that they were formed as civil companies and outside the norms of church law.
A few weeks after the meeting with Bishop Pataki, in July of 1996, Father Wendt was in Ukraine recruiting the very first monastic candidates. And at the same time, Father Damien was back in Miami transferring all of the property that belonged to the monastery to the school.
Then, a few months later, in December 1996, Fathers Wendt and Damien legally amended the school's Articles of Incorporation. Now they said the academy was an independent, self-governing school in the Catholic tradition, but that it is not under the jurisdiction or control of the hierarchy of any church.
Now, before these two moves, if the school or the monastery closed, all of its assets would have been absorbed by the eparchy, its governing body. But now, the monastery had no assets other than a modest bank account. And Holy Cross Academy was no longer officially affiliated with the Byzantine Church at all.
Everything now belonged to the directors of Holy Cross Academy, namely Father Wendt and Father Damien, two monks who took a vow of poverty.
I think Father Wendt saw himself as an intellectual. I think he saw himself as a great authority, and he desperately wanted people to follow him. And what he was actually doing was setting up his own little operation that wasn't under the control of the eparchy. And it was his own operation where he was the be-all and end-all, and he even told that to the teachers. There is no higher authority than me. And that's not the way it is in parochial schools that are affiliated with part of the Catholic Church. Everybody answers to a higher authority, whether it's to a bishop or to the Pope. But Father Wendt was very specific that there was no other authority to appeal to but him.
By the following year, Bishop Pataki noticed what happened at Holy Cross, and he wasn't pleased that the Byzantine priests were continuing to advertise the now independent academy as a Catholic school. But the bishop also found out about a new project at Holy Cross, and Pataki asked to speak with the priests again. Here's Assistant State Attorney Gail Levine to explain.
What happened was there came a point where he was aware that there were boys being brought over from Ukraine. And he met with Wendt, and he said, "What are you doing? We don't take boys under the age of 18 to be monks. This isn't part of our faith. This isn't part of what we do." And they met, and they had a long meeting over a couple of days. And at that point, that particular bishop of Passaic, New Jersey said, "If you don't get the boys out of there, we're basically separating you, or for lack of a better term, excommunicating you." They didn't come back to Miami and tell anybody. And because the Byzantine Rite is so few and far between, nobody talked about it.
We know from the Eparchy documents that Father Wendt was feeling persecuted by Bishop Pataki at the time of the second meeting. So much so that he reached out to a cardinal at the Vatican for help.
Bishop Pataki also sent a letter to that same cardinal, only now his concerns weren't just about the school. He was questioning whether the monastery was truly a monastery, or whether Father Abbot Wendt was really an abbot at all. That's coming up after a break.
Welcome back to Sacred Scandal.
Back when I was still a student at Holy Cross Academy in the late 90s, I didn't know about what was going on between the school, its monastery, and the eparchy. Of course, after the murder of Sister Michelle and the sex abuse allegations were made, we students heard whispers that something was going on there. And there were rumors that maybe Father Wendt and Father Damien weren't really priests. In trying to figure out the truth, Melanie and I came across some documents that addressed the conflict between the school's priests and Bishop Pataki from the eparchy.
We got a copy of a document sent from Bishop Pataki in New Jersey to Cardinal Achille Silvestrini at the Vatican back in 1997. It's something called a votum, which is like an official, authoritative opinion in a case in the church. And in this votum, Bishop Pataki laid out a case against the monastery, arguing it was not a valid church body. He also made some other recommendations for the priests. We showed this document to some former Holy Cross students.
Go ahead and read that for me if you can.
Okay, the directives addressed to Reverend Wendt are as follows. He shall cease and desist from representing himself as a professed monk and is consequently forbidden to wear the monastic habit. Since he is neither a monk nor an abbot, he shall cease and desist from representing himself as an abbot in general and as abbot of Holy Cross Monastery. The Reverend Jabal shall cease and desist from representing himself as a professed monk and is consequently forbidden to wear the monastic habit. Are permitted to reside at Sunset Drive until such time to discern the future course of their lives. The academy shall be restructured in conformity with the norms of canon law and shall not use the designation Catholic school or private Catholic school without proper ecclesiastical authorization. I mean, it's something that you read and you're disappointed to know. Yeah.
This whole document is about a 25-page report with more than 30 attached documents to support its argument. But neither of us are lawyers, let alone lawyers familiar with church law, and it can be hard to understand everything that's going on.
We reached out to the eparchy and some of the people who were involved in the bishop's case to try to understand what he was getting at. But they didn't respond or comment. We even got in touch with the canon lawyers for the Vatican, who eventually worked on this case, but they also declined to comment. So, to help us interpret why Bishop Pataki made these suggestions, we spoke with a priest and canon law expert.
I'm Father Lou Vallone. I'm a retired priest of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. I also, for a long time, was adjunct professor in the School of Law at Duquesne University, teaching an elective in canon law.
To be transparent, when we talked to Father Lou, we told him nothing about the murder at Holy Cross or the sexual abuse allegations against Fathers Wendt and Damien.
Now, Father Lou also knows about the relationship groups like Byzantines have with the Catholic Church because he is a bi-ritual priest. He's not only a priest of the Latin or Western Church in Rome, but he's also qualified to serve Mass for the Maronite Church. Maronites, like the Byzantines, are part of the Eastern Catholic Church.
Okay, so there are 27 Catholic churches. They're all under the Bishop of Rome as the singular head and vicar of Christ. The largest one in the world, the one what most people are familiar with, is what we call the Latin Church. But also there are Eastern churches. They have their own form of spirituality, their own form of liturgy, their own code of canon law. The Catholic churches in the East are under the Pope.
And all of these churches communicate to the Pope and the Vatican through something called the Oriental Congregation. Back in the late 1990s, the congregation was led by Cardinal Silvestrini, which is why both Father Wendt and Bishop Pataki contacted him in their dispute.
Father Lou also told us that the argument Bishop Pataki made to the congregation wasn't that Father Damien and Father Wendt weren't priests, but that they weren't actually monks, and that Holy Cross was not a valid monastery. And it all stems back to the fact that when they founded that monastery, they also founded a new monastic order.
And can I ask, is there some kind of protocol or process that needs to be followed to establish one of these new orders?
Yes, there is. If you have a vision, all right, if you want to establish an order, the person who has the authority, the governance, is the local bishop. You go to him. The local bishop says, okay, I give you permission to start doing it. You have to write your bylaws. You have to articulate what your special charism is. Why are you starting it? Couldn't this be put under the Jesuits or the Franciscans, etc.? If the local bishop gives his permission, he has oversight of it.
For Catholics, charism is a special talent or gift from the Holy Spirit that a monastic order focuses on. Father Wendt and Father Damien proved this first step. They got permission from Bishop Dudek, the eparch in power, when they founded Holy Cross. And then they submitted their vision for the monastery, and their charism would be building the school.
But one of the next steps to becoming monks, they skipped.
Since, religious life is so old, there are certain steps. As a diocesan priest, I had to go to the seminary to be formed. Spiritual formation, academic formation, pastoral formation, and human formation to be a priest in the parish. For religious orders, they have to be formed in that communal life, communal prayer, the evangelical councils. So they have to go through a training period, postulancy, novitiate, to specifically prepare them for that communal life. And then they take temporary vows, for example. It's an incremental system. So you come in as a postulant, I think I want to do this. Then, if you do okay as a postulant, then you're a novice. If you do okay as a novice, you take temporary vows. If you do okay in temporary vows, eventually you take permanent vows.
Bishop Pataki argued canon law, stating that for a novice to become a professed monk, they need to be in that novice stage for at least 3 years. And then they must profess their vows to someone who has been in a director position for at least 10 years.
Beyond that, to get the title of abbot, the leader of a monastery, the eparchy argued law saying that a person needed to be a professed monk for at least a decade. Bishop Pataki says his predecessor ignored these laws. And to be clear here, there is a difference between a priest and a monk. They both make vows of chastity, But monks also take vows of obedience to their order. They also take a vow of poverty, to own nothing.
All right, so there was the priest who was named the abbot. He was in a seminary at one time, it appears, studying, I think, for the Latin Church. This guy had already been formed as a priest in the seminary. The eparch gave him permission to establish a monastery and added a second person for the establishment. However, the two people that he gave permission to establish the monastery did not go through the training and formation to become religious. They did no postulancy or novitiate anywhere. They did not make vows in any established house. Instead, the bishop said, I'll take your vows, I'll make you religious. And the one priest, he took his vows one day without any formation and appointed him abbot. He took the second one, who was a deacon at the time, professed his vows and ordained him to the priesthood, and said, the two of you are now priest monks, and you can embark on your mission of establishing a school.
Bishop Pataki's votum to the Vatican said that there was something even simpler that the bishop before him ignored when allowing them to create the monastery. A part of canon law that's existed for more than 1,000 years. They didn't have enough members.
So there's certain very, very basic things. If you want to start a religious order, a community, a communal life, you have to start with at least 3. So that's number one. You have to start with at least 3. Well, at least goes back to St. Benedict and then the formation of the Benedictine monasticism, but it's one of those common sense things. Now, Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to preach. You need 2 people to go out to the world and spread things because they're support for each other. But if you're going to seal yourself off kind of from the world, 2's not enough. You know, if 2 guys want to vote that your monastery is going to do something, one guy votes yay, one guy votes nay, there's nobody to break the tie. So what does common sense tell you? You got to have a third guy to break the tie.
Father Lou told us that it's from here Bishop Pataki built the case against the monastery. Monasteries are able to run themselves as a community. But he told us that without having gone through the proper process to become monks, or even having enough members to start a monastery, Father Wendt and Father Damien would just be regular priests, and the property they held would fall under the direct control of the eparchy's authority.
So here's the analogy. You can try to bake a cake. You get all your elements together, you mix it in a bowl, you throw it in the oven, it smells like a cake, it looks like a cake. When you take it out and eat it, you left something important out. You didn't put milk in, you didn't put butter in, you didn't put sugar in. And when you take a taste of it, you say, it looks and smells like a cake, but it ain't a cake. So the new eparch says, this looked and smelled like a monastery, but the essential ingredients, the laws that it takes to establish a monastery, weren't there. Therefore, it's not a monastery, and they are not monks. And therefore, he has governance and jurisdiction over their property, their mission, and their lives, because now they are under the promise of obedience to go where he sends them to work in a parish or whatever.
Father Lou told us that even though all these basic rules were ignored, Bishop Dudek hadn't done anything against church law.
Bishops are like dictators, he said. They can really do whatever they want until someone challenges that they're breaking a universal law of the church. In this case, that's what the new bishop, Andrew Pataki, was doing, challenging Bishop Dudek's old decisions.
Father Pataki recommended to the Vatican that the eparchy figure out what to do with the school and the monastery. And he suggested Father Wendt and Father Damien stop dressing as an abbot and a monk and be reassigned somewhere else.
Now, the eparch called them back to the eparchy. You are not monks. You are priests of my diocese. Come back and I'll give you a priestly job to do. It appears they did not do that.
But they had already moved their property beyond the bishop's legal reach, and they altered the school's mission to make it independent from any church.
So now you have rogue priests saying they're accountable to no one. I mean, the bottom line here is, and it's really, I've got to laugh because this is all so really, really complicated, and to me, it's really, really simple. You had two guys who wanted to do their own thing, and they manipulated a bishop and the church in order to run their own con. And they seem to have gotten away with it for quite a while. These were con men. These were sociopaths. These were narcissists, as I interpret their actions. So let me be more precise. What they did was narcissistic behavior. What they did was sociopathic behavior. What they did was manipulative behavior. Now, they may be saints, and them and God may be in a lot better relationship than I have with God. I don't know. That's interior. But judging by behavior and external actions, this was a big con. This was a long con. This would make a better movie than The Sting.
Father Lou said he would expect the Vatican to favor Bishop Pataki's ironclad case. But the only evidence of change that came from Bishop Pataki's recommendations was that Holy Cross Academy was removed from the Directory of Catholic Schools.
In our search, we've come across records of independent, on-site inspections made after the bishop reached out to the Vatican. But we've never come across a record of any full report or ruling from Rome. And the surviving lawyers who led the investigation for the Vatican declined to comment on the case. Even the state's prosecution and defense teams never fully resolved the outcome of the Eparchy's investigation. It was a time before Catholic organizations were compelled by the Pope to cooperate with law enforcement. Mike's attorney, Edith Georgi, said her legal powers only stretched so far.
We tried in our investigation to get through to Pataki and his New Jersey people, and many doors were closed.
Now, this whole investigation by the Eparchy was totally invisible to me as a student at Holy Cross. I really knew nothing about it until we started interviewing lawyers, digging through documents, and watching the testimony of the monastic candidates. We asked Mike what it was like to be behind the scenes and inside the monastery as the investigation happened.
Did they ever tell you or talk to you about the relationship with the bishop or the Eparchy of Passaic?
Yes, they hated the bishop. They always said that he's a really bad bishop and he really wants to close down the school, the monastery. He don't like the fact that we're there. So I remember them being stressed out, especially when the bishop would send somebody try to inspect the school. I remember them being nervous about it. And, you know, they would coach us and teach us what to say when they interviewed us. So I remember, yeah, so they told us.
Oh, you were interviewed by the Eparchy?
Oh, yes. At least one time. And I remember Father Gibol telling us, make sure, you know, you never say bad things about the school, especially never say that you're sleeping, you know, in this bed, spending time in the priest's room, and, you know.
Who would tell you that?
I believe it was Father Gibol who took me to the side and said that. And then, of course, Father Wendt would just in general tell us, you know, say only good things about the school, the monastery, and that bishop that tried to, you know, destroy the good thing. You know, he would say, make sure he paints this archbishop as a really bad guy.
Do you remember who it was and what they asked you?
I don't know who it was, no. But I remember him asking me, you know, how are you? You know, do you like being in the monastery? Are the priests, you know, doing everything right? Are the priests, you know, praying and, you know, doing everything what they're supposed to do? And, you know, and I would answer those questions that everything's fine.
Did you feel like you wanted to be honest, but you couldn't?
Yeah, but I couldn't. I just withheld everything. And I felt like if I said anything bad or anything, and the priest would find out that me saying that, you know, they would, you know, punish me or just, you know, kick me out of the place and just, so yeah. So I remember they were really panicking. And I remember Father Wendt ordering me to help Father Gibault to put more icons on the wall of his room and hide the TV into the closet, put a bunch of clothes on it, and take his king-size bed and put it in a single bed.
And Father Damien Gibault's bed, Mike says, isn't the only one he was asked to hide.
Even in Holy Cross, patrol always stayed over in Len's house. You stay in Len's bed. They only had one bed, Len's bed. But, for example, if there was like inspection oil coming in from New Jersey Passaic, I remember one time I helping, because Len says, help patrol move this bed so it looked like patrol is sleeping in separate rooms.
So they knew they were doing something wrong.
Oh, yeah, of course. They say, okay, make sure, because this one room in Len's house, so there was nothing but there but a whole bunch of garbage there. Not like garbage, but a whole bunch of like boxes, like furniture, all stacked up, nothing. The room was not used, but the storage, like storage space. So they say, okay, the inspection's coming from this bishop from New Jersey, so okay, help for arrange it, take everything out from the room and put bed in there so it looks like he's sleeping in a separate room.
Aside from being Father Wendt's assistant, Mike told us a lot about Petro Tarenta's relationship with the priest. He says that they lived in the monastery and shared a bed. They traveled together, and Petro acted as Wendt's translator in Ukraine. Over the years, they spent a lot of time together, and they grew close. But there was more to their relationship than anyone at Holy Cross ever knew. Petro was Father Wendt's son. That's coming up after a break. Welcome back to Sacred Scandal. I'm Paula Barrows.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
The guy named Petro was completely aligned with Wendt and Damien. And so he was the hardest one, so to speak, to get truthful information out of, because you could tell he was really in on the web that they had created.
Who's Bishop Pataki?
She is a Catholic bishop who...
This is Petro Tarenta. He's being questioned by defense attorney Ray Tassif about the Eparchy of Pasaic's investigation into Holy Cross Academy.
Now, what were Bishop Pataki's concerns?
The only problem that I'm aware of was that Bishop Pataki was not acting in a proper way as a bishop towards a monastery. He was very distracted. That's what I heard from Father Abbott.
Did Bishop Pataki have concerns that Father Abbott and Father Damien were not monks and were not priests?
I believe so. I think he was making that claim.
And did Bishop Pataki have concerns that the monks and the priests at Holy Cross were not really Catholic?
I don't know about that.
Were those expressed to you by Father Abbott?
I don't think so.
Bishop Pataki had concerns that what was happening at Holy Cross was not in keeping with Catholicism, correct?
He was trying to say that in general, I mean, this is what my knowledge is, which is very limited, that Father Abbott and Father Damien are not real priests or monks, and sometimes they're not Catholic or something like that.
Do you know whether or not Bishop Pataki ordered an investigation of the monastery at Holy Cross to investigate the guardianship issues of having 13, 14, 15-year-old boys at the monastery?
I don't know what the investigation was for or by whom it was ordered, but there was at one time that a group of people came. They talked to Father Abbott, Father Damien, and other school members. All I know is that the Catholic Church, they concluded that they suspended all Bishop Pataki's accusations and claims, and they were on our side.
That's for a fact? Has there been a report issued?
There wasn't a report, but that's what I know.
That's what you've been told?
Right.
And who told you that?
I believe Father Abbott.
Father Abbott.
We wanted to pick up here with Petro because Though we've mentioned him a lot, we've never really talked too much about him or his background. He was one of the first monastic candidates at Holy Cross. We also know Petro was Father Wendt's assistant and spent a lot of time in the monastery where Wendt lived.
Unlike some of the other candidates at Holy Cross, Petro had a bit of a different background. He wasn't from a rural village, but grew up more middle class in a small city. Both his parents worked, and he had an uncle who was a priest.
Though the other boys didn't have much contact with their parents beyond letters, Petro's family became a part of Holy Cross. His father and an uncle were managers of the candidate's house in Ukraine. They were paid to help keep it running and keep an eye on the boys living there.
Even investigators like prosecutor Gail Levine noticed something different about Petro.
One thing that we saw was very interesting was Petro Tarenta, who was what we considered and what appeared to be the favorite of Gregory Wendt. In fact, he lived most nights with Gregory Wendt. He was one of the only ones that had his own room in the candidate's house. But we saw that the bed didn't appear to be lived in and the room didn't appear to be lived in. He lived with the father. He lived with Gregory Wendt because he studied later than the others, and he was supposed to be like his servant or something, but it seemed to me that they were staying together in the same room. That's what it appeared to everyone. We thought that there was just something wrong with that, and then he blurted out that he had been adopted.
The prosecution and defense teams found Petro had been adopted by Father Abbot Wendt. It happened around the same time that the Eparchy investigation into Holy Cross got underway. Mike's defense attorney, Ray Tassev, pushed Petro on the adoption and his relationship with Father Wendt during testimony.
You have described your relationship with Father Abbot as, quote, a perfect match. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What's your relationship to Father Gregory Wendt?
I'm his adopted son.
Whose idea was it that you become his adopted son?
Primarily, I would say it was his idea.
And what benefit did he tell you that you would receive by being his adopted son?
It was just for my interests for the future. That if I was adopted, it could help me.
Did he tell you that it could help you because if the church was ever closed down or ceased to exist, that you could continue to have a relationship with him?
We didn't talk about it in that way, but I could see it as it could be a good reason.
Well, that's one of the reasons he told you, right?
Well, the primary reason for the adoption was that our relationship between him and me. He liked me as his son, and I had feelings of affiliation towards him also. And he, as any father would want the best for his child, and he wanted to make sure that if something happens to him, that if I would be adopted, that would be an advantage for me.
He loved you as a son.
Yes.
Do you use his last name?
I haven't used it officially, yes.
You don't use it, do you?
I don't use it so far.
And has he introduced you to other family members as his son?
Probably to his mother.
Mr. Tarento, what year did you become his adopted son?
I believe it was 98.
So you've been his adopted son for 4 years.
Yes.
I have no more questions.
That adoption in 1998 happened weeks before Petro's 18th birthday. Gail Levine, the assistant state attorney, said it was something she never truly understood.
It's very unusual to have an adoption so late in life. And I could not imagine why a monk would need to be a parent, because really a monk's job is to minister to everyone in the church, and you're not supposed to have children. You're supposed to take a vow of celibacy, just like a priest. And a monastic candidate was giving up everything. He was giving up his parents in Ukraine, so why did he need to have a parent here? So initially, we thought maybe for purposes of immigration. But immigration told us no, that wouldn't have mattered. So we knew that that wasn't really the answer. And then the question was, why? And then we heard a rumbling about inheritance. Well, if there was a vow of poverty, why would there be any inheritance? Like, who inherits a church? We didn't know whether there was really an ulterior motive. So that's really an unanswered question to us.
Petro wasn't the only monk the priest tried to adopt. Mike told us and his lawyers that around the same time as Petro's adoption, Father Damien tried to adopt him too. And it came up on one of the only 2 trips he took home to Ukraine while visiting his parents.
Yeah, because I had to go and renew the visa. That was like 2 years in or so, and I had to go, and then Father Gibault to adopt me. And so they had to keep it like secret and stuff. They said the reason for it would be easier for me to be an American resident, but it's so you don't see that happening at all in Catholic. Only where like monks or priests try to adopt somebody, some younger boys to be the whatever son. It's unbelievable. So really, they try to keep it hush hush. I remember. So me and Gibault went back to Ukraine. So I had to tell my parents for them to sign the papers. And I remember being around my parents. I said, Gibault wants you to sign the papers so I can be adopted. But I remember telling them in the background, says, don't do it. Don't sign.
You were telling your parents not to sign it?
Yes. Don't sign it. So at the end, they didn't sign it. And of course, we both suspected I would say something like that to them. I said, I never said anything. And he's like, oh, you weren't persuasive enough, and I didn't care.
He was telling you that you weren't persuasive enough?
Yes.
He was depending on you to convince your own parents to let you get adopted?
Yes.
So why did he want to adopt you, do you think?
Of course, the reason they would say was that, it'd be easier for me to be a resident. But the point is, they never tried to adopt any other kids that were there at the time. So anyway, they let me get both. So, I told my parents not to sign the papers, so they didn't.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was your parents' reaction when they heard about the adoption?
Of course, there was like shock. What the hell's going on?
And can I ask you, to your knowledge, are there any laws regarding a monk being a parent or adopting a child legally?
A monk would be difficult. I am aware of a few diocesan priests who adopted. I would say that it would be impossible to take on the responsibilities of a parent, either in civil law or in canon law. A diocesan priest who only takes a promise of obedience and no vow of poverty. And I've personally known half a dozen priests who have adopted children. But for a monk, the structure would not allow for it. A monk who owns nothing, who is totally dependent because of his vow of poverty on the community, could not establish fiscal responsibility for a child. A lot of the times, these people who have these visions of founding an order, founding a mission, you wonder if that vision came from God or from their own narcissism. These are people who live in houses with mirrors, not windows. But the reason why we have so many rules and regulations, that's called discernment. You have to keep testing against it. So if this came from God, you're not the only one who can discern this. Other people have to look at it and say, yeah, this looks like it comes from God, not from your personal ambition.
It's hard to hear about things like the eparchy's investigation, the transferring of property, and the adoptions, and not think that the priests of Holy Cross felt the rules of the church and monastic living did not apply to them. But by the time the original murder case was closed, none of it would matter. Because by the time Mike finally received his sentence, the priests of Holy Cross would no longer be Catholics. That's next time on Sacred Scandal. Sacred Scandal is a production of Exile Content Studio in partnership with iHeartRadio's My Cultura podcast network. Sacred Scandal was created and produced by Melanie Bartley and me, Paula Barrows. Our senior producer is Dennis Funk of Written in Air. The executive producers are Rose Reed and Nando Villa. Production, mixing, and sound design by Helena de Groot. Our production assistant is Imani Leonard. The show is fact-checked by Kimberly Winston. Original music and final audio mixing comes from Patrick Hart. And special thanks on this episode to Corey Chakowski, Brian Robertson, and Travis Roig. If you'd like to reach out, email us at hello@sacredscandalpodcast.com. And you can follow us on Instagram @Sacred Scandal.